the truth.
And welcome, folks, to Truth versus News. This is January 14th, 2 weeks into the brand new decade, and not a decade we're having here, folks. We're back here and glad to be here. And I will say that we have an emphasis, if you could show me on screen, full screen, Jim. We like to say that America is ruled by lies and truth is completely absent, and the American population tolerates it. Ruled by lies is now the American way, and when truth is politicized, all is lost. So we are having a heck of a time here. It seems like everybody's lying, and who do you trust in the media? Well, I'd say that we are always pursuing truth, and it's truth versus all this new stuff. With the most dangerous mind in America, Jim Fetzer, and ex-Army espionage expert Scott Bennett. I think we have the top minds in the world, most dangerous minds, and essentially we're feeling the heat here. But go for it, Jim. We got some hot stuff. Let's start off with Lee and Rand Paul. Mike Lee.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, Mike Lee and Rand Paul were very upset with the briefing they were giving about Iran and the justification for taking out Soleimani. After the nearly hour-long meeting with officials, Lee told reporters the briefing was insulting. Worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue. The senators were angered when Trump officials suggested a debate over war powers would embolden Iran. Lee said he thought such comments were absolutely insane. I think that's unacceptable. Turned out that the Trump administration sent Secretary of State Pompeo, Defense Secretary Esper, CIA Director Hess, full Joint Chiefs Chair Miley to brief House and Senate lawmakers, but it did not go down well. No. Meanwhile, in relation to the assassination of Soleimani, it turns out that this appears to have been an Israeli op. From all of the indications I have, Israel targeted Soleimani. Trump pulled the trigger. I can see Bibi giving the Donald a phone call to tell him he can position himself for a triumphal reelection, just as Barack Obama positioned himself for a triumphal reelection by taking out Osama bin Laden, except that Osama had died a decade earlier. The raid on the compound was completely fake. Soleimani, however, was very much alive and was decimated, actually blown apart by the drone strike. Even Haaretz has actually confirmed my hypothesis that Israeli intel helped the United States to take out Soleimani. After all, the guy wasn't being covert in his activities. He took a commercial flight to Iraq to work on a peace deal with Saudi Arabia at the request of the Prime Minister of Iraq, who is working on behalf of Pompeo and Trump. This gets really bad. Meanwhile, James Corbett has done a brilliant job of debunking the propaganda campaign that Soleimani was responsible for 600 Americans' death. ISIS has praised the murder of Soleimani as divine intervention that will help them rise again, because Soleimani was more responsible than any other figure for defeating ISIS by using the various resources available. He was perhaps the world's greatest counterterrorism expert. Now we have the Taliban hitting U.S. military convoys. In this case, they killed all the troops. We can expect a lot more on this order, because what essentially Trump has done thereby is to make American troops fair game. Scott, I'm very, very troubled by what's gone on here. I value your comments and thoughts.
Well, Jim, I think you and I need to go to Vegas like Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man and clean up if we were playing odds, because we're right. We know every card before they play it. I'll let you play Tom Cruise. I'll be Dustin Hoffman. But I think a Vegas trip's in order, because we've been saying this from the very beginning. We said it was an Israeli op. We said it was Mossad intelligence. We said it was most likely Mossad agents that initially fired the rocket at the American contractor and allegedly killed him. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an Israeli contractor and they were all in on this, or flying the F-15 planes that killed the 25 Iraqis that prompted the Iraqis to go to the embassy and break windows and shout and chant and get angry. They didn't shoot the embassy. They didn't burn it. They didn't blow it up with grenades. That tells you something. They protested, as we see everywhere in America when people are killed. Black Lives Matter, for God's sake. You see hundreds, if not thousands, of these blacks and stuff going out when some guy is wielding a knife and shot by police. The same thing happened in Iraq, only they were shot by F-15 missiles. And then that, of course, prompted the prime minister to go in and remove the people from the Iraqi embassy, which is what we suggested to, and that was acted upon. But then the U.S. fired and killed Soleimani, who is revered by the Iranians as their General Lee. Imagine if General Lee in the Civil War fighting the Union was taken out by France or Spain or something like that. You'd have the entire Confederacy pissed off and wanting to kill every Spanish diplomat. But instead, the Iranians and the Iraqis have asked the United States to remove itself from Iraq, trying to expel them because Iraq doesn't want to be a ground for this tit-for-tat war. And it's amazing in the hypocrisy and the stupidity and arrogance that we see. I mean, Don's introduction is very appropriate. This is about truth, not news. There is no truth in the news that Pompeo and Gina Haspel and all these people are spouting out and poisoning the president with. It's all propaganda, and it's all been geared for the last 20 years. They've all been on this playbook, and they're not abandoning that. They think they're in the Super Bowl of nations, and they are going to continue with their playbook, as insane as it is. But the Iranians didn't take the bait. They simply fired missiles in as a demonstration of saving face to their own people. But now it's entering another dimension, of course. There's economic sanction warfare, and there's diplomatic warfare. There's most likely going to be another false flag in the Persian Gulf, probably a British ship of some degree, or maybe another Saudi situation. But this is something that is very alarming because, the next stage is going to be entering in the other powers, Russia or China, and doing another naval exercise. Flipping to the Gina Haspel and Pompeo and Esper briefing to Rand Paul and Mike Lee and others, the reason that they were upset by this briefing, Jim, was because it was a very blatant, brutal, rude, arrogant presentation of, we know what happened, but we can't tell you. You just go along with it. This is the enemy, blah, blah, blah. And the people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee, who are very smart, very, in a sense, humble and respectful towards the Constitution and aware of the limitation of powers that the president and the Congress have, said, wait a minute, this is not, we're not your audience. We're not here to enforce your policies. We are the Congress. We are the House of the People of the United States of America. We decide when we go to war and who do we go to war with, not you. Your intelligence, Gina Haspel, incidentally, since your experience in the Bush administration during the early Iraq days led us to nothing but misery, death, and chaos of our own reputation in the eyes of the world with this original Iraq invasion. You think we're going to trust you with more intel of the same? You're doing Iraq 2.0? You think we're going to trust Bibi Netanyahu, who sat in front of the Congress, who should be arrested for lying to Congress and among other things? Bibi Netanyahu comes to Congress and says Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons. You need to go and kill your own soldiers in a war against them. He did the same thing now with Iraq. So I think Mike Lee and Rand Paul are very aware of the agenda, the war agenda, and the nature of war that Gina Haspel and Mike Pompeo have, and Esper has. You see them already contradicting the president. Esper contradicted the president before. Trump had said on Laura Ingraham he doesn't want war. He doesn't want to stay in the Middle East. Laura Ingraham said, why don't you use this as a chance to get out? He said, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Well, you can't just be okay with it. The president has to say, this is my policy. Like Doug McGregor said, we're getting out. I don't care what the National Security Council says. I don't care what a bunch of old men in naval uniforms or army uniforms calling themselves generals say. I don't care what Booz Allen or SAIC or all the contractors say. I care what Mr. America and Mrs. America say in Ohio, in Arkansas. The people who are small town taxpayers whose kids go off to war and come back in body bags or in vegetable states, or like the last 2 kids that just got killed over in Afghanistan, like Doug McGregor said, for nothing. We are cops on a street corner in a savage country with people that hate us because they've lost family members and generations. So this whole thing needs to have a major paradigm shift. And this is really a civil war of truth and against the propagandists, Jim. Gina Haspel, Mike Pompeo, Esper, and Trump is caught in the middle, and the people are against these warmongers. Trump has got to remember that. Everybody in America is watching him, and they are seeing, is he on our side or is he on their side? And the moment Trump goes on their side is the moment he loses the election, I think. So he has to stay on the side of the people, Jim.
Well, Scott, I think you're right about all of the above. Michael Hudson has a really fascinating article on my blog now, where I've republished it. America escalates its democratic oil war in the Near East, where the point I make in a preliminary, I believe he has offered a brilliant exposition of U.S. motives, tactics, and strategy in the Middle East, where the assassination of, while I believe he's offered a brilliant exposition, the assassination of Soleimani appears to have been a target of opportunity for Israel, as I've suggested in what really happened and why it matters. For anyone who missed the memo, the imminence of the threat he posed is a crucial issue of international law, since the UN Charter declares that one nation has a right to a preemptory strike against another, as was the case here, only when either one, it has the approval of the UN Security Council, which was not the case here, or two, it's confronted an imminent threat that demanded an immediate response, which likewise does not appear to be the case either. Even if it was consistent with U.S. foreign policy and the Senate had approved taking him out, that would not override international law. Now, the 4 embassy allegation has been falling apart, and yet Trump is claiming it doesn't even matter. This is very, very troubling because it makes the President of the United States appear to be a liar. Turns out that Trump authorized Soleimani's assassination 7 months ago, according to another report, which, had he done so, obviously vitiates the imminent threat and is likely to unleash assassinations from multiple countries. This is an opening of Pandora's box. So we have Barr and Pompeo shifting the justification for the Iran strike from imminent to deterrence, but that doesn't satisfy international law, suggesting to me both the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General haven't done their homework. Here we have Pompeo now saying, and this is perhaps most shocking of all, killing Soleimani is part of a broader strategy applying to China and Russia. Killing the general is meant to show real deterrence. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo still has not totally abandoned the pretext that the assassination of Soleimani was based on an imminent threat, but is moving to rebrand the operation as part of a broad new strategy that also applies to China and Russia. So may they anticipate that their leaders are going to be targeted for assassination too? Pompeo set this rather disturbing claim out in talks at Stanford's Hoover Institute, avoiding mentioning an imminent threat talking point that Trump himself has now abandoned. He says killing Soleimani was part of the Trump administration's goal of real deterrence. He said nations have to understand the U.S. is not only capable of imposing costs on nations by killing their leaders, but willing to do so, saying the killing puts the U.S. in the greatest position of strength ever. But this is barbaric. This is a violation of all of the rules of war. This is a complete lunacy. Pompeo presented the killing of Soleimani as part of the same strategy that has seen the U.S. send lethal military aid to Ukraine and withdraw the U.S. from arms control deals and the testing of intermediate range nuclear missiles. He also said sending more ships through the South China Sea was restoring credibility. Americans, however, are increasingly critical of Trump's record on Iran. Most expect war. Reuters, the American public is increasingly critical of President Trump's handling of Iran after he ordered the U.S. military to kill a powerful Iranian military commander. A majority of U.S. adults now expect the countries to be at war in the near future. The national poll found 53% of adults in the U.S. disapprove of Trump's handling of Iran, an increase of about 9 percentage points from a month ago. The number who strongly disapprove, 39%, is up 10 points. So it's obviously having an impact. While the response was largely split along party lines, disapproval up the past month among Democrats and independents, but not changing among Republicans. It's the independents who are making a difference, who will decide the outcome of election, which in my opinion, Trump is now placed in jeopardy. Very troubling. And of course, we've had the response from the House by passing a War Powers Act requiring that the president must solicit the approval of the Congress, especially the Senate, before he launches any attacks. This is totally appropriate, and Trump, I'm afraid to say, is jeopardizing his position of responsibility as a credible president of the United States by his activities here. Scott, I'm eager to get your views on this as well.
Well, the imminent threat that Trump used and Pompeo used and Esper used that always comes out of the president's mouth. Everything that Pompeo and Esper say is what Trump is saying. That's their excuse. They work for the president. Whatever he says, they are expressing. Even though they don't express it and they twist it and they pervert it and they add their own, that's their musical chair game. When the music stops, Pompeo and Esper and Haspel and everybody else in the White House rushes to a chair to say, we just did what he told us to do. We said what he told us to say. We were in the meetings and this is what we intuited. If we were wrong, then he should have corrected us, but he never did. So we're assuming everything we've said is right and consistent with the orders from the executive office. So blame him if these orders are wrong. That's going to be their fallback position. That's how they get him impeached and fired and get him entrapped. And that's what they've done. We've said this all along. Again, Jim and Scott go to Vegas and clean up like Rain Man. The imminent threat would have popped up on the State Department security channels. You would have had conversations, you would have had chatter, you would have had case officers who work these countries and follow it on a daily level. The commander's briefing shows everything that is going on in country. So you see everything in the media, everything in the universities, everything in the military sector, the diplomatic sectors of a country. All of that is designed to give a stability analysis and assessment to a commander in a commander's briefing book. And the military would have done it. The military attaches would have given that to the ambassador on a daily basis. The State Department security would have, and the CIA substation chief. The point is, you would have had a group, a long, slow boil of this sort of material. And if that doesn't exist, which I saw on CNN later, they've said there is no evidence of imminent threat in the State Department. If they don't have any chatter, any conversations, it's all a lie. It's all used to justify a military strike with language that's not backed up by the facts and backed up reality. And now if there is investigations that this was done as part of a preemptive operation dating back to the summertime, then of course the Israelis and the Zionists and the Mossad fed the president. They give him all sorts of lies. Mr. President, we have a high-level terrorist that's in this sector. He's responsible for 600 deaths. He needs to be killed. He's a general of some degree. The terrorists like him, but the bad guys don't. And Trump has got half-truths, and he acts on half-truths, and he discovers later that the other half of the truth would have totally shifted and changed his decision. That's what they don't give him. They give him half-truths. They box him into bad decisions. They did it with the Syrian chemical attack that never occurred. They've done it with the Soleimani situation. They've done it with the embassy uprising. And if Trump is too dumb to not get people around him who've worked in the government sectors and can prod and can filter and can test these things and can go in and demand the qualifications to get the eminence, then he doesn't belong in the office because he's a kid. He's like a toddler on top of a tractor. The toddler on the tractor doesn't understand the brake and the plow and the gas and all the nine. That's what he doesn't understand about government or the military or the intelligence sectors. He's sitting up there at a podium trying to, sing his best Frank Sinatra song in a political sense. And, all the music is a cacophony. And yet in his own ear, he's looking like old Blue Eyes. No, you're looking like a man who's going to be impeached for other subject matter. This could be the hook that gets him. And it's all going to come out, I think, in the data. Now, how this plays out, how he plays it out, he's got to fire his whole team, Jim. He's got to get rid of everybody and start afresh and start with new. And he's got good people. Doug McGregor, who's on Tucker Carlson, he'd be the best substitute for a State Department secretary, as well as Senator Dick Black would be excellent in setting up, a reestablishment of ambassadorial relations with Iran to discuss these issues. Those two, the reestablishment of an embassy with Iran would be a major diplomatic victory. And the Iranians would welcome that. And they don't have to do anything except, we want to get an assessment. We want to renew relations. The American people do not want hostility. And the more Trump presses for hostility, I fear that he's going to put himself in a position that the Democrats, despite their hypocrisy and controversies, are going to find much easier to defeat. And that is, he's for war, we're for peace. Jim?
I think you're right, Scott. And something else that disturbs me mightily is that Trump doesn't even seem to understand that these sanctions imposed on Iran are a form of collective punishment that's proscribed by the Geneva Conventions and international law. In fact, I don't know why he hasn't been called out over this issue before. Our sanctions on Iraq were similarly collective judgment. They led to the death of 500,000 Iraqi infants. I mean, it's outrageous we're doing this. He has made himself vulnerable to bona fide legitimate articles of impeachment that you and I would support, Scott. It's that bad.
Yep.
Meanwhile, we have a video capturing the moment a missile struck the Boeing 737, the Ukrainian Airlines, where the question arises, why would anyone in the world have had their camera pointed to the dark sky under this set of circumstances? There would have been no good reason unless they knew something was about to happen. With the narrative surrounding the crashed Ukrainian 737 changing by the minute, shifting away from an initially proposed theory of a technical error, shifting towards speculation it was accidentally or not taken down by someone, Iranians, Israelis, CIA on the ground, evidence is suddenly starting to emerge to validate this latest theory. And so moments ago, an unverified, unconfirmed video has appeared on the Telegram network purporting to show the moment a missile struck the Ukrainian flight, PS-752. In a stunning reversal, Rand now has admitted to having accidentally shot down the plane. After multiple denials and demands for proof from foreign entities accusing them of spraying psychological warfare, President Rouhani has admitted Iran accidentally shot down the Ukrainian jetliner. Scott, on this show last week, we talked about Iran needing to come clean if, in fact, that they had been responsible. That would be beneath Iran to lie about it. I believe that we may have had an impact. Here you are being interviewed on Press TV, urging Canada to share info with Tehran. Meanwhile, here's a very thoughtful piece. Was Iranian missile operator tricked into shooting down the Ukrainian airline plane? The Iranian confession their military shot down the Ukraine plane is the end of the matter as far as international diplomacy and the media is concerned. The official story then about what happened is this. It's 2 a.m. January 8th. Our guy is sitting in a Tor M1 air defense missile system about 10 kilometers northwest of Khomeini International Airport, west of Tehran. General Soleimani has been buried the day before. The last half hour or so, a couple dozen Iranian ballistic missiles had been fired from western Iran at 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. The entire Iranian military is on alert. Stress levels are high. There's been a lot of chatter about a likely U.S. response. Our guy is one of several teams positioned around Tehran tasked with shooting down anything on his radar that fits the profile. Hours pass without incident. He starts to doubt he'll see any action, at least not tonight. By 6 a.m., the only thing he can report having seen are each of the 9 scheduled flights that had departed the airport that night. He watched them take normal flight paths off the northwest runway, climb into the clear night sky, and then veer north or northeast. Since the Tor M1 system he's operated is fitted with identification friend or foe functionality, he could even see their call signs. The second to last was a Qatar Airways flight headed for Hong Kong. The last flight that night would be Ukraine International Airlines flight PS 752 headed for Kiev. It departed 1 hour late at 6:12 a.m., but followed the exact same initial flight path as the previous flights. As it climbed and reached 4,600 feet, the plane's transponder suddenly stopped working. 2 minutes or so after takeoff, the plane then made a sharp right turn, headed east, turning back around to Tehran, no doubt to land, given the transponder had gone out, traveling another 15 to 20 kilometers over 4 minutes before crashing into an area near a football field and exploding on impact. For some as yet unknown reason, our guy had suddenly become convinced that Boeing 737 was an enemy target. As per protocol, he requested authorization to launch, but his superiors could not be reached because of some problems with communication network. Again, according to protocol, he had a 10-second window in which to decide whether to launch or not. Still, convinced the 737 was a cruise missile or enemy aircraft, he launched the 2 missiles that sealed the fate of the 178 persons aboard. Here's a report from one of my bloggers commenting on the situation. It's a pretty good summary, and I wanted to share it. 2 minutes after takeoff, the transponder communications lights were shut off, obviously via remote. It flew in the SAC configuration for about 4 minutes and 30 seconds before, in error, Iranian ground forces mistook it for a cruise missile and shot it down, with Iran's top nuclear physicists aboard. The plane was set out during a no-fly order to get the most important people and their families out of Iran before a war broke out, which Iran was expecting. The only question in this story now is who interfered with communication between the airport, the military, and the pilots, who went dark for a considerable length of time before the missiles were launched. Approximately 1 minute after the first missile, a second was launched, though the first probably would have been enough. 8 minutes after takeoff, it crashed. My guess, my blogger, is Israel is the one who hacked the plane and shut the transponder lights and radios off to force it to fly completely dark, the way a cruise missile would. They are the only ones celebrating. I think he's got it right. The remote control system was actually designed by Dov Zakheim. It's been used on airliners to thwart hijackers, but what it actually does is allow outside sources to remotely take control of key features of the plane in a range of situations just like this. Meanwhile, Ukraine International Airlines has published a list of the 167 passengers on board, and what's ironic is there is no English name. They all appear to be, if not Ukrainian, Iranian. There's no 67 Canadians on the flight list, which some of us are finding rather disturbing in and of itself. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, the Mossad motto of "through deception thou shalt wage war," and murder and rape and pillage and engage in some of the most heinous crimes that the human species can engage in, warped with their demonic apartheid racist philosophy, is coming out in this conflict, this war. And the value is with the internet, with independent patriot analysts and people that are really up to speed on a lot of this after studying it, working the problem for 10, 15 years. We have a good, group of people in the world, Ali Damagard and many others, that instantly pounce to the default position of, okay, let's operate from the perspective that this was Israeli, this is Mossad, who benefits, why was this done? But how was it done? And of course, Dov Zakheim, my old boss at Booz Allen Hamilton, rears his ugly head. And this shooting down of a civilian aircraft, the Iranians, again, Jim, you're right. We've told them to be transparent and honest and as clear as anything. That's what people will respond to and nations will respond to is honesty. What they won't tolerate is any sort of quiet, secretive, playing the cards close to the chest. That looks like an agenda rather than they should be throwing it out saying, look at what they've done. We want international experts to look at the whole timeline and the whole operation to interview everyone about this because we suspect, like you said, an outside nation hacked into the system like they've done before. They've done cyber attacks on Iran. The Stuxnet virus was an Israeli virus that they planted in the Iranian centrifuges and such. But they need an international investigation to see the signature marks on this whole timeline and episode. And if they go back to this was a cyber attack, well, now you've got the U.S. and Israel engaging in an assassination, a murder of these people on the plane, like they murdered the Iranians in 1980 something when the plane was shot down by the naval vessel under Reagan. So I think the Russians may be party and playing in and looking and examining this, and I think all of it is going to come out just as part of the process of looking at the technology and the signature fingerprints that predated it, Jim.
And I think it's going to reveal that we got it exactly right. Meanwhile, Trump has taken other actions that are highly objectionable, even outrageous, barring the Iranian foreign minister from addressing the UN to avoid a speech at the UN Security Council critical of President Trump's decision to assassinate General Soleimani. The U.S. has refused to allow the Iranian foreign minister, Javad Zarif, to enter the country for the purpose of conducting UN business. Completely outrageous. Zarif has been planning to visit the UN for weeks, had requested the visa back in December. The 1947 UN headquarters treaty obliges the U.S. not to impose any impediments to transmit to or from the headquarters district for officials invited to the UN on official business. This means the U.S. is overtly violating this deal, just as it is violating international law in multiple respects in its treatment of Iran. I am embarrassed by this. Meanwhile, the Iraqi PM confirms receiving a signed U.S. pullout order, which was accepted and confirmed. Amid confusion over a reported U.S. letter to Iraq announcing the steps its military would take to move out of Iraq, Prime Minister Abdel Abdul Mahabi confirmed that Baghdad has actually received a signed and translated copy from the U.S. Army concerning the withdrawal. They even asked for a second translation to make sure it was right. Nevertheless, the U.S. is rebuffing the Iraqi PM, who's asking to talk about the troop exit, claiming it's all right as a force for good to stay. I mean, this is enough to make you vomit. Perhaps entirely to be expected, the U.S. administration has unambiguously rejected Prime Minister Mahdi's urgent call for Washington to enact a U.S. troop withdrawal mechanism in Iraq. In a Thursday phone call to Secretary of State Pompeo, the Iraqi leader urged the administration to send delegates to Iraq to prepare a mechanism to carry out the parliament's resolution regarding the withdrawal of foreign troops from Iraq. Echoing prior statements of Mark Esper, the State Department underscored Friday it's our right as a force for good in the region to maintain appropriate force posture in the Middle East. I mean, this is just absurd. America is a force for good in the Middle East, as a spokeswoman for the State Department. Our military presence in Iraq is to continue the fight against ISIS. And as the Secretary said, we're committed to protecting Americans, Iraqis, and our coalition partners. And yet, President Trump has previously declared the total demise of the Islamic State, which has long been the main rationale for our being there, which Soleimani had been very successful in defeating and virtually entirely eliminating. Now we have Trump threatening to cut off Baghdad's access to its New York fed cash. This is just disgusting. After rejecting Iraqi Prime Minister Mahdi's request to begin talks on withdrawal of U.S. troops, there are now more signs of eroding ties between the two countries. The Wall Street Journal reports that according to Iraqi officials, yes, Iraq has anonymous sources too. The Trump administration warned Iraq this week it risks losing access to a critical government bank account if Baghdad kicks out the U.S. forces. We are sure to shift, and all that sounds a lot like a quid pro quo, only because it is. But how will they balance the need to hammer the president with their neocon establishment desire to keep boots on the ground, whatever it takes? In other words, the Democrats are very much invested as the war party. Meanwhile, Bibi says Israel should stay out of the fallout from the U.S. killing of Soleimani, which is consistent with my interpretation that he was actually calling the shots here. He backs away, orders ministers to stay out of a purely American event. When have you ever heard Bibi say anything remotely like that? Or when have you ever heard of a president taking overt personal direct responsibility for an action like this? It just isn't done. But in this case, in order to protect Israel, Trump has done this at the request of Bibi Netanyahu. He's reportedly warned his cabinet not to get too involved in the U.S. murder of the Iranian general, lest Tel Aviv be dragged into the escalating conflict between Washington and Tehran. Does that sound sensible at all? The assassination of Soleimani isn't an Israeli event, but an American event. We were not involved and should not be dragged into it. Just what he would say if he, in fact, were actually right at the center and had actually called the shot. He advised ministers to avoid speaking to the media about Thursday's targeted assassination beyond supporting the U.S. right to defend itself, so as not to give the impression that Israel had played any role in it, even though Israel was front and center. Directors of Mossad and military intel reassured the ministers the likelihood of a retaliatory attack was low, since Israel stayed at a distance from the incident, which is complete nonsense. Netanyahu's sudden reticence is particularly notable because he's been advocating the U.S.-Iran conflict for most of his political career for over 20 years. He's insisted the Islamic Republic was just steps away from producing nuclear weapons, even when Israeli intelligence publicly argued against it. He was also front and center in the run-up to the most recent Iraq war, warning the U.S. Congress in 2002 that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, including pursuing atomic bombs. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? Which turned out not to exist at all. Just last year, Netanyahu was urging the U.S. and its Middle Eastern allies to take up the cause of war against Iran, emboldened by U.S. President Trump's decision to pull out of the 2015 nuclear deal and reimpose crippling sanctions against Iran, despite its compliance with the agreement, which once again I underline, are forms of collective punishment that are prohibited by international law. However, the overt U.S. killing of a military commander was apparently very popular in Iran, has provoked serious talk of retribution, not just in Tehran, but among Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia military that boasts of fighting Israel to a draw in 2006 as well. Many call it the most humiliating defeat that Israel has ever experienced in its history. Netanyahu has had a tough 2019, clinging on to the post of PM in a purely technical mandate after two elections months apart delivered a hung Knesset and required an unprecedented third coming this spring. Talking a tough game against Iran to get Israeli votes is one thing, but facing the real possibility of being the target of Iranian missiles is apparently quite another. Amid Iran tensions, Netanyahu promises a strong response if Israel attacks. Prime Minister Netanyahu said on Wednesday, after an Iranian missile strike on U.S.-led forces in Iraq, that Israel would hit back hard against anyone who attacked his country. While he is most certainly invited it, Scott, I think his behavior has been utterly reprehensible from beginning to end. Your thoughts?
Amen. What's he still doing there? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, he's being examined, investigated, prosecuted. He's been constantly crying out for immunity. The cabinet
Yeah.
have not given him immunity. This demonstration participation in the Iraq-U.S. war, it was a flash war, but it was a war. And Trump should thank his saving graces that Iran didn't respond with the military capacity it could have, or else you could have had tens of thousands of U.S. deaths in Qatar, in naval operations, and various bases. Yes, Iraq would have been struck back, but they would have unleashed a lethal blow, I think, against Donald Trump and his entire election had they responded. But they didn't. They responded with a symbolic gesture. I think it was Trump's opportunity for back channel diplomatic discussions, and I certainly hope he's smart enough to actualize those. But Netanyahu doesn't want anything like that. Netanyahu wants conflict and war and paid for by the American treasury and the American blood. That's why he's quoted of trying to step back away from this, because he knows he will be implicated. And that's really the mission, is to implicate Israel, implicate them as providing the intelligence. That's what Gina Haspel and Pompeo didn't want to give Senator Rand Paul and Mike Lee. They didn't want to answer the question, who is the human intelligence asset that provided this? They would have said a Mossad Israeli agent, an Israeli case officer. This came to us from Israeli channels. That's what they would have told the American Congress, but they didn't. They said, well, we can't divulge that. It's human systems and processes. It's layered. That's how they get away with this, and they didn't get away with it under Paul and Lee. I think everyone smells, a dead rat in this, and it's Israeli. It's an Israeli operation from start to finish, and they're going to engage in other false flag attacks. They're going to engage in an attempt to escalate and heighten these tensions and these operations against Iran. Their only hope is to provoke Iran into a military strike, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Israel is digging itself into a ditch. Netanyahu is going to run out of gas like Rommel in the desert and be abandoned, and hopefully face an execution war crime tribunal. Now, this whole diplomatic language that is totally undiplomatic with regards to Trump claiming the oil and keeping the bank account money of Iraq. I mean, you're destroying every suggestion of nobility that you tried to desperately inflate and invent from the beginning of the Iraq war till present. It has been a constant theme to the crippled soldiers and their families that the fight was worth it because we've brought freedom and peace and democracy, and we've been hailed as liberators by the Iraqis, and we've set them on a course for democracy. Well, they've responded by asking politely that the American troops expel themselves from the country and that they be left to their own destiny, and they do not want a partnership with the United States. And yet we're betraying the very fundamental principle that we claim we represent: human rights, liberty, and sovereignty, national sovereignty. The hypocrisy is so toxic. I mean, I turned green just thinking about this. And Don's message in the beginning, this is, America is now turned into a nation of lies and liars with regards to the media and the State Department and the CIA. And the president is participating with these lies. He's not rejecting them, he's participating. So this is always going to end bad. Lies always yield the fruit of death and destruction on the person that sows them, because the people are eventually going to vomit it out. And Trump is in a dangerous position of being vomited out. Not that the Democrats are any way more appetizing. I mean, they have a flavor of feces from 2 weeks old kind of thing. But Trump is in a dangerous position because he's backing all of these false operations. And I'll tell you, the Iraqis could say, look, we don't care about your bases. We don't care about your billions of dollars you spent. We could send you a bill for all of the damage that you've done and the murder you've done. We want you out. We'll blow up your air base, or you can blow it up. We don't want any memory of you. We'll have the Chinese come in and build a new air base, and they'll do it at a fraction of the cost. We'll give them so many barrels of oil. They'll give us part of their million manpower contractor construction army, they'll come and build something. They'll pay their people with rice and houses and boat trips, for vacations. We're going into a barter system, Jim, that I think is going to emerge because the U.S. petrodollar is worthless. It's worthless. It's worth nothing. No one wants it because you get your gold stolen, your oil stolen. You're given these worthless pieces of paper, and if you question anything, you're killed, annihilated, and like Muammar Gaddafi, you're sodomized with a bayonet. So I think we're going towards a barter, oil for labor program, or an oil for food or whatever. And the Chinese really have the human capital, the human labor that is worth a lot of money, because if you send 100,000 Chinese workers over to build the infrastructure of Iraq or Syria, guess what? They've got a contract for so many barrels of oil for the next 10 or 20 years. And that's going to increasingly isolate the United States because their dollars aren't going to be accepted. The only thing accepted is labor and on hard products, ironically, to fix the mess, the destruction, the death that the United States has caused since September 11th. Jim?
Scott, you're so right, because the decimation of the moral stature of the United States, we have always claimed to be acting on the basis of principle, morality, and the law. And here we are vitiating all of the above. We're acting like brutes. We're threatening, we're manipulating, and we're killing, and we're claiming we're justified in doing that. It is as outrageous a situation as the United States has ever encountered. And Trump is the guy who's responsible. Scott, it's just stunning, just absolutely stunning. Here we have now Iran launching the attack on the Iraqi air base housing U.S. troops. But it turns out there's much more going on behind the scene than meets the eye. Turns out Iran gave advance notice of the missile attack on the U.S. in order to avoid casualties. U.S. officials have confirmed they were given advance notice the night before the Iranian missile strike against bases housing U.S. troops, part of what is seen as a concerted effort to avoid casualties. Iranian FM Javad Zarif said the advance notice was provided to the Iraqi government, citing respect for Iraqi sovereignty. Iraq told the U.S. giving time to get people out of the way of the attack, and this is the very foreign minister Trump would allow to address the United Nations. In addition, there are reports the Iranians were directly communicating with the U.S. through multiple sources, including the Swiss embassy in Iran, to assure them the attacks were the extent of their retaliation and that they are done. Trump confirmed that Iran is standing down after the attack, though his comments were mostly boilerplate about the Iran nuclear deal, and he accused President Obama of providing the funds Iran used to buy the missiles fired on Tuesday. Again, more of this tripe ignoring that the $150 billion returned to Iran was Iran's own money that had been improperly frozen by the United States. Meanwhile, we had in advance from General Salami, who replaced Soleimani, threats for a hard, firm, regrettable strike, which obviously did not occur. So it's quite fascinating that Iran has scaled back what the Revolutionary Guard Corps commander now, Hossein Salami, would maybe have preferred to have done. The general was speaking at the funeral of the Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani. He praised the general and Iran's promised response, saying today all humanity admires and praises him as a model of resistance and support for the oppressed. They want to throw the sun off, make a mistake by throwing rocks, and this is a tradition of the criminals of the universe who do not understand and cannot fight the sun. Salami is no stranger to making threats against American interests, as Breitbart News has reported as recently as 48 hours ago. He said Iran would deliver a painful blow to the U.S. somewhere in the Middle East. Just how Iran would do this was not outlined. However, last September, he declared Iran has special hidden military powers it's ready to unleash at any moment on an unsuspecting world. According to the domestic Fars News, Salami said enemies of his country are unaware of their capabilities, adding Tehran has significantly enhanced its military power. create threats and problems unknown and unexpected for those who oppose it, which, by the way, I happen to believe. It may be scalar weapons, EMF capability. I have no doubt Iran has all kinds of non-nuclear weapons at its disposal. In the meanwhile, we know that Iran has greatly improved the accuracy of its missiles, making it a far more dangerous foe. When a swarm of drones and cruise missiles attacked Saudi Arabia's biggest oil facility back on September 14th, an outraged Trump administration quickly blamed Iran for what it called an unprecedented attack on global energy supplies. But the real surprise was the strike's accuracy. Of 19 weapons used, all but 2 scored direct hits. I remember commenting at the time the precision of the hits on the oil tanks, and yet they weren't loaded with explosives that would have blown them apart. So it may be that this actually was an Iranian illustration of the accuracy of their missiles without bringing about the devastation they could very well have brought about. When a swarm of drones and cruise missiles attacked, when the smoke cleared, Saudi officials counted 14 holes where incoming projectiles had sliced through petroleum storage tanks. 3 other critical parts of the oil processing facility had also been hit and disabled, shutting it down and temporarily cutting Saudi oil production in half. In subsequent reports, U.S. analysts would describe the attack as a kind of wake-up call, evidence of a vastly improved arsenal of high-precision missiles that Iran has quietly developed and shared with allies over the past decade. In the event of a wider war with the United States, Iran would probably destroy such weapons to inflict substantial damage on any number of targets, from U.S. military bases to oil facilities to sites in Israel, analysts say. They are saying we can now hit those, said Fabian Hintz, an expert on Iran's missile program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. What we've seen in Iran in the past few years is a change from missiles that were mainly political or psychological tools to actual battlefield weapons. This is a quantum change. Meanwhile, the IDF chief warns Israelis the next war will hit our home front extremely hard, meaning he's reflecting and appreciating both the number and the quality of the Israeli missiles and their ability to strike home. He issued a bleak warning that the next war, when it comes, would hit the home front hard. It must be noted, recognized that in the next war, whether in the north or against Hamas, heavy fire will be directed against our home front. I'm looking people in the eye and saying there will be heavy fire. We have to recognize this, and we have to prepare for this. We have to prepare for this militarily. The civil hierarchies have to prepare for this, and we have to prepare for this mentally. The U.S. failure to repel the Iranian attack exposes Israeli vulnerability to Iranian missiles, as reported by the Israeli press itself. An Israeli military intelligence website says Iran's recent successful counterattacks against the U.S. in al-Assad air base in western Iraq strikes a note of warning for Israel, as the occupying regime's anti-missile systems are based on American models. Scott, this is serious. This is real. You got the head of Mossad acknowledging as much. I think this has actually changed the equation in the Middle East. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a very good point, Jim. If the United States possessed the ability to demonstrate its superior weapons able to shoot down missiles coming at them, you would have thought they would have demonstrated that when Iran did its counterstrike and fired the missiles at its U.S. bases. The U.S., by doing nothing, demonstrates it was, a party to that, or it didn't have the technology to either announce it or to stop it. If we had switched this, and I said from the beginning, this is a psychological diplomatic operation by Iran to satisfy its own domestic audiences and to quash and stop American aggression. However, it could have been much different. You could have had the targeting of these bases in very populated areas, and you could have had, the targeting of the U.S. embassy in Iraq, and they could have wiped out and killed a lot of people. and the U.S. wouldn't have been able to stop it, wouldn't have been able to shoot them down. That's the message, because if they didn't shoot these missiles down that nobody knew was duds, in fact, everybody has said they were real. It was only because of the incompetence of the Iranians or blah, blah, blaming it on them. No mention of our lack of missile technology or ability. Bongino and these other people are up there trying to spout this. I think it's nonsense, but it opens up the door. Maybe the U.S. had it and they just chose not to use it, but I think that's a strategic mistake. The U.S. should have shot down every missile that the Iranians sent over. That doesn't mean they have to respond with a barrage. They just sit and play defense. They killed their bad guy, allegedly. Now they sit and they pick the missiles out of the sky and demonstrate you're not going to get anything in our airspace. But they didn't do that. So they're either lying and they don't have the technology, or they lost a strategic advantage opportunity is my guess. Probably the latter, because you have so many stupid people running the White House, running the Defense Department, running the CIA, and running state. They're finding themselves just sinking into a quagmire, and Trump is going to be the one who suffers. You see them cultivating the populations with fear. That's the preparations for the war. You have the Israelis saying the next war is going to be very hard in the home front. What they're really saying is the next war that we start, we trigger, we false flag, design, and engineer, we're committed to go to war, and you're going to receive the consequences. You're going to be hit with it. The U.S. seems to be setting itself up with that as well. But we don't have a foothold to scale this wall. There's no 600 people that Soleimani killed. The entire ISIS community standing up in celebration of the death of Soleimani means we're on the side of ISIS and Daesh, or we're as stupid as a bag of cow dung in the field. And the Iraqis and the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese and the Europeans who stand against this ISIS-Daesh thing are going, the U.S. Look like a bunch of fools or hypocrites or liars or all of the above. And that is going to, I think, eventually split the fabric of any political military alliance, and you're going to have a major political paradigm shift coupled with economic translations into oil for labor, and the labor for reconstruction, and then the reconstruction, new political ties and military ties between China, Russia, Iran, Syria, possibly Pakistan and India. And the U.S. petrodollar is going to sink to a very low level, Jim.
And Scott, by assassinating Rand's leading military figure, which was itself an act of war, by violating Iraqi sovereignty in the process, by imposing these collective punishments, the sanctions, the United States is being discredited from having any moral authority or standing among the community of nations. Don, I know we've come to the point here where we need to, yes, go right ahead, my friend.
Now, the Truth versus News for January 14th, halfway through, and there's a lot more to come that's even hotter than this. So put your asbestos gloves on, see if you can handle it. So right now we're going to say adios here.